Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. In this episode, we dive into a story that sounds like it's straight out of an economic thriller, except it's very real. We're talking about Russia's economic performance in the context of its ongoing war in Ukraine. And according to experts, it's a classic case of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Russia's economic woes are a saga with twists and turns that would even make your GPS give up. As the war in Ukraine continues beyond its second year, Russia can't afford to lose, but can it afford to win? Before we answer that question, let's take a look at our report to find out more.
Despite facing significant losses in the war with Ukraine, Russia has persistently pursued plans to bolster the capacity of its armed forces. Spearheaded by Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, the so-called Shoigu reform aimed to reinforce military capabilities and adapt to evolving geopolitical challenges. Russia's military expansion, however, is encountering hurdles, particularly related to the limitation of its arms industry production capacity and heavy losses incurred during the conflict in Ukraine. Despite setbacks, Russia continues to increase its military manpower and arms expenditure. The armed forces saw an influx of recruits, with financial incentives and a broad recruitment campaign initiated in 2023. Financial allocations for arms spending have surged, with a significant portion of the state budget dedicated to security needs and military modernization. Russia's militarization efforts are not limited to the armed forces, but extend to society, with ideological factors playing a significant role. Putin's rhetoric underscores the ideological underpinnings of the conflict in Ukraine, emphasizing the historical and strategic importance of subjugating the nation. State-sponsored initiatives aim to instill patriotic fervor, particularly among youth, through education and volunteer movements. As Russia continues its militarization ideological campaigns, NATO countries are urged to bolster support for Ukraine and reassess defense strategies. Collaboration between NATO and Ukraine, coupled with sustained sanctions on Russia, will be crucial in countering Russian aggression and safeguarding regional stability.
And now, let's take a look at today's story in greater detail. So, why can't Russia afford to win? Winning means taking responsibility for rebuilding and securing Ukraine, which is like picking up the tab at the most expensive dinner you didn't even enjoy. The cost? Astronomical. The benefits? Dubious. Plus, they would continue to face isolation from the broader international market, turning their economy into the financial equivalent of a deserted island. Now, losing isn't any better. If Russia pulls back, it faces the Herculean task of repairing its own damaged infrastructure and economy, not to mention dealing with the massive social unrest that could follow. The economic burden of the war is already massive, with the countries hemorrhaging money like a leaky faucet. We're talking about a record defense budget of $386 billion this year alone. That's a lot of zeros, if you believe it. But here is where it gets really interesting. Despite a reported GDP growth of 5.5% in the third quarter of 2023, most of this growth is fueled by what? You guessed it. Military spending. Tanks, planes, ammunition, and compensations for the families of soldiers all contribute to these GDP figures. Essentially, Russia's economy is not necessarily focused on diversification. This economic model has brought about a severe labor shortage, with young professionals either fleeing the country or being drafted into the war. Imagine a nation short by 5 million workers. What does that do? It drives wages up, not because the economy is booming, but because there is hardly anyone left to do the jobs in question. And with the official inflation at 7.4%, nearly double the central bank's target, the economic outlook is bleaker than the Siberian winter. If economics were a game, Russia's current strategy would be turning all the difficulty settings up to insane mode and then throwing out the controller out of the window. A protracted stalemate might be the only solution for Russia to avoid total economic collapse. The Russian regime has no incentive to end the war and deal with the economic fallout. So what are they doing? They keep the war machine running because at this point, it's literally the engine of their economy. What we're seeing here is a nation whose economy is geared entirely towards sustaining a conflict that it neither can afford to win nor can it afford to lose. It's an economic paradox that could have dire consequences not just for Russia, but for the entire global community as well. As the war drags on and the economic dials all point to red, the question remains: how long can Russia maintain this precarious balancing act? The answer to that could shape the future of international relations and global economic stability. Now, here to shed more light on the issue is our guest today, Dar Tabak, former advisor to the US ambassador in Moscow. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning, TVP World. Good morning. Hello.
So, the Russian economy, there have been many things said about it recently, but just how transparent is it really to us outside observers in the West? Russia can say many things about the state of affairs, about its economic figures and so on. How much of that is really to be believed, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of it has some truth to it. And I'm not an economist, but I do talk almost on a daily basis to one of the world known economists, Andrei Ilarionov, who was an economic advisor to Putin from 2000 to 2005. And he tells me the Russian economy is strong. And I guess it will continue to be strong because of the oil prices. It's just as simple as that. We continue to buy oil, we continue to buy gas from Russia. And I'm talking about Europe, United States, and other countries like China and India that consumes quite a bit from it. And we in the United States are not pumping oil. You know, we're sitting on it. And one of the things that our former president is saying, if he ever becomes a president again, one of the things he's going to say, pump, baby, pump it.
But Russians are also trying to pump their oil, but they have encountered some difficulties there in the form of Ukrainian drones burning up a few of their refineries. So apparently, actually, their capacity for export has gone down. Do you think this is the only way to do that, though? Because Ukraine has essentially humiliated the idea of Western sanctions. Where the sanctions didn't work, drones did the job. Do you think it's the only way, really? Or are there any methods, any tools which we can use to harm the Russian economy and to make them reconsider?
No, of course it's not the only way. I mean, nothing is the military is not the only way, political or diplomatic. It's a combination of things, of course. And as far as I know, Ukrainians are able to destroy not Russian oil fields, but refineries. So the Russians can't produce enough fuel, gas, to put into their military machine to make their tanks and armor to move and airplanes to fly. But oil itself, the export of oil has not really decreased, and the prices of oil are still high. So again, I wouldn't bet on it, but it is a combination. And of course, sanctions. Sanctions have to be serious. They're not as serious sanctions that we have applied. As we said, they're going to be sanctions from hell. It seems like those sanctions haven't worked. They worked against certain industries and certain individuals, like Russian generals. Well, Russian generals can't travel anyway, and they don't really have Western bank accounts. Putin made sure he's in control of it. So sanctions have to also work, and we have to stop selling things to Russia. We really have to be serious about it, because otherwise their economy grows. And I can tell you, I live in Miami, in a very, what is called a Russian area, and I can tell you that these people are still coming into the United States from Russia with plenty of money, fancy cars, and they continue to buy. So it don't look to me like they're suffering a great deal. So also because of the sanctions that they're not really working, they're working against us, because they have sanctioned Russian individuals who left Russia and went to other countries. Well, because of their Russian passport, they can't get asylum, they can't get a lot of things, benefits, so they go back to Russia. And this is usually computer scientists, information technologies. So these are not idiots. So instead of us welcoming them and saying, go ahead and defect, because my parents were defectors from Soviet Union, instead of welcoming the way my parents were welcomed, we tell them no, because you have a Russian passport. Regardless, you could be like the picture you're showing right now. This guy has a Russian face, but the guy behind him doesn't have a Russian face. I mean, I guess you have to be part of it to understand. Many of them are not really ethnic Russians. As a matter of fact, they're humiliated by Russians. They want to leave that country. They want to fight that country, but we tend to push them back. And say, like, this is Russian Orthodox. I bet you 1/4 of these people standing in that formation are Muslims. They're Udmurts. They Chuvashe. There are plenty of people in the Russian army that are not Russians, but because we do not accept them in the West, they have no choice but to go back and build the Russian economy and build the Russian military that way.
So what options have we still got? Recently, there were news that the United States is actually making steps towards basically freeing itself from the need to import uranium from Russia, from Rosatom, which would be a step in the right direction. But there are still, we're still hesitant to sanction the likes of Rosatom. We're hesitant about confiscating Russian sovereign assets. The European Union wants to use the proceeds from these assets, but outright confiscation still seems to be many commentators saying, look, this is not a good idea, it would set the wrong precedent, and so on. Are we going to get anywhere with this sort of attitude? Like, yeah, we're going to go, one step forward, 2 steps back, and because it really does seem like, you've painted a fairly bleak picture of Russia being an economy that might not be very sophisticated, but it is resilient and it is actually fighting back, allowing Putin to continue to attack Ukraine. And we're not seeing this collapse that, some people say, Russia is going to collapse in a couple of months, is literally going to be forced to withdraw. Unfortunately, this did not happen. So what's next, really?
I'm glad you really asked the question, because so far it got us to where we are. That indecisiveness, this lack of commitment, got us to where we are at the brink of World War III, or already at World War III. And it happened in World War I. It happened in World War II. I guess we don't learn too quickly. Yes, we have to have a commitment. To remind you that during World War II, we were rationed here in the United States. We were rationed. In Great Britain, there was rationing of food, there was rationing of clothing, because everything went to the front, because it was a total war. We're not a total war. So we're saying, yeah, the Russian economy, if we hurt it too much, it's going to hurt us back. Yeah, I think it was one of the deputies at the NATO or European Union, I'm sorry, they said that, yes, if Russia wins, it will be and beats Ukraine, it will be very bad. But on the other hand, if Russia loses, then the gas prices and the heating oil and all those things, the prices are going to go up. So as long as we have that attitude, we're not in total war, Russia is going to be fed. It's going to be feeding itself. It's going to be feeding its issue. This is our tank they're showing that has been captured from the Ukrainians and been burned down. But the thing is, this is what happens. There's no commitment. It's like 30 tanks. It's the sanctions are not real sanctions, because we do want to keep the world order, if there is a world order. So no, we have to tighten our belts and say, okay, so we're going to have to pay more for some of the things, but we can't allow Russia to hold us hostage. But if we have some Husitis that holding the whole world, holding our aircraft carriers hostage because they can't go through Suez Canal, we have to go all the way around Africa coast. So of course Russia will do. We basically, to answer your question, we need strong leaders. We need Margaret Thatcher. We need Golda Meir. We need Ronald Reagan. We need Winston Churchill. We need somebody in the world that are going to take leadership and say, okay, this is war and we have to fight it. And we have to fight it on all fronts, including the informational front, which we're losing very badly by saying, oh, Russia is going to collapse, or Putin's got cancer, or he's already dead, or there's going to be a coup d'etat in Kremlin next week. And we hear it all over, particularly from the Russian-speaking commentators and the opposition in the West. But it's not happening. Oh, they're going to run out of missiles in a week or two. they're going to have run out of the ammunition. They don't have fuel, but yet they're getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and they're getting stronger at the front.
Or at
Because
least
they
not
have
failing, right? I mean,
leadership.
the amount of time that Ukraine had to wait for aid also didn't do a
Sure.
lot to the military situation there. So one final question, because Russia, as you said, still has the capacity to manufacture missiles. It can actually, show off its equipment and military parades like the so-called Victory Day taking place 9th of May. But there is the big question here. What to do about companies that violate sanctions? Because we're hearing over and over again, a Russian missile crashes in Ukraine, they disassemble the wreckage. Oh, there is a component manufactured in the US, another one manufactured in Germany, another one from Switzerland. And this, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be changing. There is an increasing amount of Chinese components making their way in as well, which is another problem. But is it something that can even be solved at this stage? And if so, how?
I think it can be, and it won't. We can compare it, let's say, to drugs in the United States. If there is a demand and we're a rich country and our kids have money, they're going to buy drugs. And if they're going to buy drugs, somebody's going to supply them. You can fight it all you want, but the bottom line is it's the money. It's the money. If we cut out the money from Russians, they will not be able to buy it from other countries, then this black market will stop. Nobody's going to give it to them for free, none of the components. So we need to, again, the sanctions have to work. Their banking system has to stop working. How these Russians are showing up in Miami, right across the street from you, or in my building, with all the money in the world. If we cut out the finance, we cut out the banking, the money, I think a lot of it will stop. We also have to stop selling it to them. We've been selling officially to Russia components to the explosives. And as far as I know, my friends from the Ukrainian front, and I was there myself recently at the front, the skies are swarming with the Russian drones that already have artificial intelligence in it, where they pick the target. The human doesn't even have to. They see the tank, they have the armored personnel carrier, they have few soldiers. They'll pick the priority. They'll prioritize the target. So it's a very sophisticated war machine. From what happened that they went to over 2 years ago, marched into Ukraine in informations as you're showing, almost like informations like you're showing in the parade right now on the 9th of May in Red Square in Kremlin. They thought that they were going to march in, but the Ukrainian people resisted. They didn't expect it. Then it became a World War I, kind of an entrenched war, where they sat out of the trenches, threw grenades at each other. And now it became a futuristic war, where the ones that are having an advantage are the ones that have more drones, the ones that have more unmanned vehicles at sea, in the air, on the land. And this is very futuristic. So Russians, for now, have an advantage in it, a huge advantage.
Or at least the kind of advantage that they get by getting all this sophisticated equipment from the West, which they shouldn't be.
Yes.
And that perhaps is the most important thing here, for which we do, as you mentioned, need leadership to be able to say, okay, enough is enough. It might be profitable for some companies, but this cannot continue. Dar Tabak was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. In a bid to bolster support for Ukraine in the ongoing conflict with Russia, Lithuania's Prime Minister has announced parliamentary approval for the deployment of training troops to Ukraine. The Lithuanian government, however, is now awaiting a formal request from Kyiv.
Lithuanian soldiers could soon train Ukrainian troops. The move comes amidst escalating tensions in the region, with Russia's aggressive maneuvers raising concerns among neighboring nations. Despite potential threats from Russia, The Lithuanian Prime Minister emphasizes the importance of not succumbing to fear and paralysis in the face of potential retaliation. She has also dismissed fears over Russia's potential use of nuclear weapons, citing logistical challenges and the likelihood of radioactive fallout affecting Russian territory. She underscored the need for proactive support, particularly in the light of Russia's intensified attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. Lithuania's readiness to deploy troops for training purposes reflects a broader strategy endorsed by some NATO members, including Poland and Lithuania. The initiative aligns with French President Macron's call for NATO troops deployment in Ukraine, albeit without consensus on combat roles.
Ukrainian law enforcement agencies have suggested that a prominent billionaire currently imprisoned is suspected of involvement in an attempted contract killing that occurred 20 years ago. Without directly naming the individual, authorities indicated they possess conclusive evidence identifying the orchestrator behind the assassination attempt.
The Ukrainian Prosecutor's General Office refrained from direct identification, but shared a blurred image resembling the suspect, who is known for backing President Zelensky's 2019 electoral campaign and is facing separate charges of fraud and money laundering. The suspect, Ihor Kolomoisky, one of Ukraine's wealthiest persons, has been detained since September 2023 and has contested an involvement in the attempted murder, a charge that could result in a life sentence upon conviction. The motive, according to the national police, was vengeance against a lawyer who declined participation in an unlawful scheme. In 2021, the U.S. State Department sanctioned him for alleged corrupt activities and undermining democratic processes. Despite these allegations, his supporters maintain that the charges are unfounded and represent an effort by Ukrainian authorities to showcase their commitment to combating corruption to the Western allies.
As Europe commemorates 79 years since the end of World War II and the liberation from Nazism, Berlin is gearing up to host a series of demonstrations and memorial events. However, amidst the solemn remembrance, a significant shift in the regulations surrounding symbols from the conflict has emerged.
Last year, the Berlin police had imposed a ban on both Russian and Ukrainian symbols at commemorative events. However, in a recent development, a German court ruling has overturned the prohibition on Ukrainian symbols, thus allowing their display during this year's events. The ban, which remains in place for Russian flags, military uniforms, posters featuring the letters V or Z, and other symbols perceived as glorifying Russia's war against Ukraine, extends to the sites of Soviet war memorials. Additionally, Russian marches and military songs are also prohibited. The commemorative events are set to commence with a demonstration titled 79th Anniversary of Liberation from Fascism, Thanks to the Liberators. Throughout the day, various groups, including leftist, communist and district office representatives, will pay homage by laying wreaths at different memorials across the city.
End of the line for this episode of Eastern Express. But please stay with us here on TVP World, as there are more fascinating stories waiting just around the corner. I'm Jan Czerwiński. Bye for now.